Hello folks, so we're going to start out with Photoshop for our first demonstration, and this does lead to the next exercise that we're going to be covering in within this first Photoshop uh, tutorial. So Photoshop is actually used for photo manipulation, so it is not something you would go ahead and create a corporate logo with. It is more or less a program that will allow you to, well, swap somebody's head for another body. It's primarily used as a photo manipulation tool, or in some cases, as we're going to be demonstrating today, it can be used to actually fix photos. And what we have here are two files that you should have opened, and basically they are two photos that we're going to go ahead and kind of like fix. So they're older photos, and we have pieces that are needed to go into one area over here, and let's fill in some of those blanks. So what we're going to be talking about today are a number of different tools, and one of them that we're going to be talking about is the rectangular marquee or any of the selection tools. When you're dealing with Photoshop, you have to understand that you need to select things in order to actually make them, to use them. It will designate an area that will basically allow you to designate the area you're working with. So if I were to go under this what is called a move tool, you'll see that there's a dotted box that's called a rectangular marquee. If I click and hold on that, I got the rectangular marquee, I got the elliptical marquee, and I got a single row, single column. Single row and single column I'm not going to really cover because they don't really factor into what I'm going to be doing today. But they will select 1 pixel rows or 1 pixel columns, whichever one you want to use. So I'm going to start with the rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to come over here, and basically it is a click, hold, and drag. And when I let go, I get this, what we call infamous marching ants. And these particular marching ants are designated as a selection area. So anything that was within the selection area that I just drew is what I'm currently working with. Anything on the outside I am not working with and won't do anything because I'm not going to work in this area. Now, what I can do is I can go ahead and move this selection around with the selection tool depending on what I want to do with it. And I can also add to it. If I hold down the shift key, click, hold, and drag, you can see I can add to that selection. If I want to take away a part of the selection, I can hold down the Alt Option key. Alt on a Windows, Option on the Mac. And I can move into the selection, and you can see I will take away part of the selection here. Okay. All right. So now, sometimes when you do these selections, you want to go ahead and deselect them. Now, what I would normally say is just go ahead and deselect them using a keyboard shortcut. Control D on a PC and Command D on a Mac. So if I use Control D, it'll deselect that. Now, you could actually just go out here and just click with the selection tool. However, there's one tool that's going to cause issue when you do that, and we'll get to that momentarily. All right, so now the elliptical marquee tool, you can go ahead again, create ellipses. Now, if I, with the rectangular and the elliptical, if I hold down shift for the first selection, you can actually create a perfect circle or a perfect square. After you let go and you hold down the shift, all it does is adds to it. It does not create a perfect circle or a square. So you can add to it with the shift. You can hold down the Alt Option key to take away part of the selection. Right. Okay, so again, there's multiple ways of actually selecting things, and one of the other options is underneath here. It's called the lasso tool. If I click and hold on that, I got the lasso tool. I got the polygonal lasso tool, the magnetic lasso tool, and the selection brush tool. All right, we're going to start with the lasso tool. This is probably one of the oldest tools in Photoshop. It was used pretty much in the very first version of Photoshop. And really all it is a freeform selection tool. So if I click, hold, and drag, and I go right back to where I began, you'll create a selection there. Same properties work here. If I go ahead and hold down the Shift key, I can go ahead and add to that. If I hold down the Alt Option key, I can take away. Now, one of the things to be careful with the lasso tool is you have to actually make the full selection in one stroke. So if I were to click, hold, and drag, and I decide I want to stop there, I let go, and it'll make a straight line right back to the very beginning. Now, that may work to your advantage. Sometimes it doesn't. If you're using the lasso tool, a lot of times you're trying to select organic type shapes. Something that the rectangular marquee or the elliptical won't do. So it's more a freeform type of tool. All right. Now, if I go back here and I go to, let's say, the polygonal lasso tool, if I go ahead and the polygonal lasso tool actually acts like a dot-to-dot type tool. So just like your pen tool, it will act like that. However, sometimes you want to go ahead and select things like buildings or windows or something like that that are at an angle, which the rectangular marquee tool will not do that. So you're left with the polygonal lasso tool, which will allow you to create straight line selections. Now it does act like, again, like the pen tool. If I go ahead and click and I let go, you'll see that it creates this line that's following me. I go to another area and I click again. Go to another area and click again, and then I have to go back to where I began. And that will create the selection. Now, if we go back to when I said for deselecting, you want to basically get used to using a keyboard shortcut like Control-D or Command-D on a Mac. This, and I said that there was a tool that might cause a problem with that, and this is that tool. So if any other tools in the selection area, if I went out here and just clicked, you'll see it deselected it. However, it put another point, which will cause me to have to do another one. And I'll deselect, but then it puts another point, and you just don't want that to happen. So I usually get used to hitting Control-D or Command-D on a Mac. Now, the one that we're going to be actually concentrating on is the magnetic lasso tool. Now, the magnetic lasso tool is a great tool if you have some high contrast areas in your selection. Like you're trying to select a yellow rubber duck against a white background. Or in the case here, we're trying to select these pieces to bring over to the other document. And this allows you to actually see those high contrast areas, and it'll make a selection area pretty quickly. So with this magnetic lasso tool, I'm going to actually magnify in, and that is Control plus, and magnifying out is Control minus. Now on a Mac, it is Command plus and Command minus. So if I were to go here and anywhere I see a high contrast area, I'll go ahead and click and I'll let go. And what I'm doing is just moving my cursor along that line as close as I possibly can, but I don't have to be perfect. Now you'll notice that when I get down here at the bottom, I will go ahead and hold down the space bar for a second. Oops. Okay. And follow this along. And I'm not really too worried about everything that's going on here. I think my computer's a little bit delayed with that space bar today for some reason. So I'm just going to go along these lines. Back here. And go back to the beginning, and I'll let go. Now you'll notice that there was quite a few areas that I did not select. So what I can do is I can actually go back to my lasso tool, and I can hold down Shift, and I'll start inside the selection if I'm going to add to it. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. And I will move down here, click, hold, and drag. Make a circle around the selection you want to add to. And areas I want to deselect, I'll hold down the Alt Option key and I'll start the opposite out in the area that I don't want. And I'll make a circle around the area that I want to clip off. And then Shift to add to it. Just like so. Okay. So I have this selected. Now what I want to do is, first off, I want to get this piece over into the other document. So I'm going to go up to Edit, Copy, or I can, if you notice here, when I go to Edit, Copy, you'll see that there's a Control-C. That Control-C actually is a shortcut for copy. It is a universal one. So in most programs that you work with, that Control-C is a universal shortcut key for copying, as well as Control-X for cut and Control-V for paste. Those are cut, copy, and paste. Those are universal shortcut keys. It is Control-C for copy, Control-X for cut, and Control-V for paste. Now on a Mac platform, it is Command-C, Command-X, and Command-V for those. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go to my other tab where I have this, and I'm going to go ahead and go Edit, Paste. Now I'm going to go to my Move tool. Now before I get too far into this, if you also notice, one of the things with Photoshop is you have to understand what layers are. So if I go over to my right, you'll see in the Layers palette, you'll have this layer 1, which actually is that piece that I just put down, and you'll have a background layer. Layers are more or less kind of like translucent sheets of paper that have things on them. And you can move that layer independently on top of each other. So right now there is nothing here. All right, this is what I'm working with. You can tell that by that light gray color in the Layers palette. Now what I want to do is I want to get this corner piece right here. And how I do that is I actually have to rotate it and transform it. So if I go to Edit and I go to Transform, I'm going to hit Rotate. Now the reason I'm hitting Rotate and not Scale is because I don't want to scale this. Once you scale it, it's going to not work very well, mostly because it is proportionate to the actual picture. So with this corner here, I'm just going to go ahead and hit Rotate. Or rotate it and click, hold, and drag. If I move my cursor inside it, I can move this around. And then I can go ahead and rotate more. And I can use my arrow keys to nudge. Now I encourage you to zoom in. Command plus, Command minus, or Control plus, Control minus on a Windows platform. And what I'm looking for are a lot of areas in here where things are going to line up, like right here, right there, the car, the telephone pole, the edge of the pavement here, which all look pretty good. So at that point, I'm going to go ahead and hit Return or Enter and double check it again, because sometimes when I rotate that, it will kind of like go off a little bit. But nope, looks pretty good to me. All right. So I'm going to go now to my other tab, and I'm going to select the other piece. So if you notice here, there's this one piece up here that actually has these Roman pillars in there. If you pay attention, you basically will notice that that's not even in the other one. There's only two pieces missing, and which are these. So I'm going to go to my magnetic lasso tool, and I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to click, hold, and drag. I'm going to get as close as I can to that edge. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about the edges there. And go around. and go back to the very beginning. And then I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to use my lasso tool to kind of like select more of these areas. So I'm going to go here, make a circle around that, use my space bar to move instead of the scroll bars on the side. So it makes things a little bit more efficient. Go down here. There I am. I'll double check a lot of things here. And it looks pretty good. So I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to go edit copy. I'm going to go to this tab. And I'm going to edit paste or control V. Now the same thing applies. I'm going to go to my move tool. Move tool will allow me to move things around, and you'll have to pay attention. Layer 2 is what I pasted in, is that light gray. So that tells me that that is currently what layer I am using. All right. Now I need to go to edit, and I need to transform, rotate. Rotate only. And I'll move this around. Zoom in a little bit more. This is probably the hardest of the two pieces to kind of get lined up. And it's mostly centered around that sign that becomes an issue. All right. So looking at this, I'm looking at the siding lines and everything like that. I think that's pretty good. So I'll apply that and double check it again. It needs nudge just a little bit more, like down a little bit. And that should be good. All right. So I got my pieces all set together. Now what I want to do is for the purposes of what we're doing here, for the purposes of anybody who has not used Photoshop before, I'm going to have you do one thing here. Because right now we have 3 layers. Background, layer 1, layer 2. And what I want to do is I want to fix some of these edges. I want to make it look like it wasn't scratched at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and merge these 3 layers into one. And how I do that is if I go up to the very top of the layers palette, you'll find that there's this 4 lines there. If I click that and I hit flatten image, that will go ahead and it will flatten it into one layer. Now, it is very important for you to get all those pieces lined up prior to this as best as you can, because at this point you can't really go back. I mean, I could undo to go back for one, but once you start editing this, you can't go back to do it. All right, so with that, I'm going to want to fix these areas. Now, this is what Photoshop is known for. It is for photo manipulation and photo fixing. So if I go over to my toolbox, and I'm going to go all the way, like about 1/3 of the way down, you're going to find that there's this clone stamp tool, which looks like a rubber stamp. Old days where they basically had the ink on ink pads, and there's these rubber stamps that you would go ahead and pick up the ink and transfer that ink to paper with all kinds of designs on it. Well, same thing applies here. That mentality is still being thought of here as well. So if I take my clone stamp tool, and I move my tool over here on the side, I'm going to start down here. You notice that this brush is super big. Yours may not be, but mine is, probably because that's the last thing I used it for, was that big. So I want to reduce its size. If I use my bracket keys, which are above the return or enter key on your keyboard, I can reduce its size or increase that size depending on which bracket I actually use. Now what I want to do is I want to take that brush and I want to get it somewhat close to the size of that line, but not too close, which I think this is probably fine. All right, so what I want to do is I want to fix this. Now, side note, if your brush looks like this, you're fine. If it looks like this, that means you have your caps lock on. So if it looks like a little crosshair, that means you have your caps lock on, and you can just hit caps lock, and I'll go back to that. Okay. Now to fix these. All right, with the clone stamp tool, what you have to do is think of the stages of when you had a rubber stamp and an ink pad and transferring the paper. Think about if you take that rubber stamp and you go take it, push it in the ink to pick up the ink, then you transfer it to paper, which means you're moving you picked up a pattern, you went over the paper, and you place that pattern. So what you want to do is you want to go ahead and do that same process. So in order to pick up a pattern, you have to hold down the Alt Option key. So when you hold down the Alt Option key, you get this little target thing. And then when you click and let go of everything, you've just picked up a pattern. And when I move my cursor around, you'll see that there's a little pattern inside the brush now. That is a preview of what you want, what you're going to be placing. So at this point, I want to line it up with the edges. I always tend to go for edges first. Everything else is kind of like, can be filled in no matter what. So if I go to an edge like this, and I click, hold, and drag, pay attention to the left of the brush. You'll see that there is a little plus sign or crosshair there. That refers to what pattern is currently being picked up. So if I use this all the time, this is probably good for this. But a lot of times if I use it and I place down something, the pattern doesn't match up. So I always say keep your finger on the Alt Option key and the other fingers on the mouse, because you'll want to go ahead and resample a lot of times to kind of make sure that everything is all lined up. So like so. All right. And this is what the clone stamp tool does. And you can reduce the size of things if things get a little bit too tight. You can reduce the size of those, and you can add different things, and take out scratches here and there, like so. Now I'm constantly resampling because, again, I want to make sure that everything is all lined up. Otherwise, things will just look funky. Like this. Going to different edges, filling those in. Okay. All right. So that is what the clone stamp tool, and this gives you a brief introduction to what Photoshop is capable of. So I will stop there, and I'll see you in the next video.